Sometimes I think about how many different beliefs my kids pick up just because I do. One of the newest beliefs that's kind of being picked up by teens based on what's happening from their parents and other adults in culture is this fear of aging. Some are taking it to extreme lengths. How can we talk to our kids about this and give them encouragement that growing old and having your body change might just be part of the way that God's designed things? Let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, Generation Z and Generation Alpha are kind of scared to age. That's what some are finding out. They've found that social media has encouraged children and teens to delve into anti-aging treatments for skin way earlier than necessary. Using intense chemicals on young skin leads to a myriad of other conditions and allergic reactions. This quest to prevent aging has gone further and further as young adults opt to preventative cosmetic surgeries before they show signs of aging, with social media influencers only growing and growing more in style, and now kids finding social media influencers earlier and earlier. Children and teens are now being sucked into this world of anti-aging that's kind of plagued the mid-20s to 30-year-old moms, and now it's impacting children and teens that are on social media. They've been kind of deemed Sephora kids, and they're storming beauty stores for skincare products that were really never designed for them. Teens spent 33% more on cosmetics and 19% more on skincare in 2023 than they did in 2022, according to a Piper Sandler survey. Now, I want to bring this up because I've really loved your book, kind of Start with the Heart, how it guides us to consider how to engage kids in culture. Thinking about that, how should we kind of apply some of the things from that book as we kind of find ourselves on this road with our kids right now in culture?
The first thing I want to say that really alarms me is that this is a type of dysphoria. It's not a gender dysphoria necessarily where these girls want to become boys. That's not what's going on here. But they're so dissatisfied with their looks when they're 7, or they're so concerned with what they might look like when they're 13, or they have to have control over what God is naturally going to do as he progresses them as they age. And we're allowing them to buy into this idea that they should have influence and control at their age. That concerns me. I am certainly concerned about what these products might be doing to their skin. We don't know. They're not done growing yet. And so there needs to be elasticity, if that's the right word, to their skin. And what if it interferes with that? I think one of the things that I would think of from the book Start with the Heart, and I appreciate you mentioning that book, is how carefully I delineate in that book the role of specific complements. And although I would say that our physical identity is the least important of the 5, we have a spiritual self, intellectual, social, and emotional selves. And I would want us to pay most of the attention to those. But there is a reality that we have a physical self. So it is okay for you to say, sweetheart, that shirt makes the color of your eyes just pop. That's a great choice for you. Or to say it to a daughter, man, did you take the time to curl your hair today to get it off your face? That's just a super cool look for you. Way to go. Like, it's okay to draw attention to them sometimes. I usually say that especially dads should also then affirm them in some other way at the same time. Otherwise, girls will think that daddy only cares about them and loves them because they're cute. That's a dangerous thing for a little girl to believe. But it's okay to affirm them. And maybe we're not doing that enough. And that's why they're concerned. Or are they watching their moms? Like, one of the things I've said, and people have heard me say this, you take a little 6-year-old to a spa with mom. So the 6-year-old, birthday party is at a spa and they're doing nails, or they're spending, $75 on a special hair treatment, and the girl is 7 or 8. What does she have to look forward to grow up for?
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I think that's really a huge question, a big question for us to ask. It's something that I think kind of comes out in Jonathan Haidt's new book, Anxious Generation. He talks about this idea of, how we as people just kind of naturally have this proclivity to find ourselves in culture. How do we learn to live and obey and kind of follow and even grow or be a participant in culture? And he kind of has these two ideas. One of them is that we have this idea of a prestige bias. When we look at life, we kind of have this bias of looking to people who are prestigious in our lives. And sometimes that's our parents, right? Because they're the first people we see, right? Like little ducklings. We kind of have them imprinted on our minds of this is who we should be like. This is who we should follow. And then there's this idea of kind of like a modeling bias where we kind of just follow whatever's common or whatever kind of presented inside of the culture as the culture, right? So we kind of get, I don't want to say like peer pressured into things, but that's really what ends up happening. If my brother makes his bed, I kind of have that sense that I should make my bed as I'm growing up. There's kind of this commonality inside of culture that we end up having this bias to kind of find ourselves as a part of culture and following it. And what Haidt says is that teenagers right now have this kind of portal in their pockets that opens their minds up to other people that really does reshape their whole world. They follow things that maybe they were never, kind of designed for. They didn't come into the world because of all those social media influencers. They came into the world because their mother and dad love them and live their lives and lead their lives in a certain way and kind of guide them in a certain way. And they have this home in a certain way. And so really this prestige bias that we kind of have should end up centering around mothers and fathers and even pastors because they build the culture that our kids end up growing in, and different teachers and people like that. There's just this reality. I kind of wonder if there's some things here that we have when we look at our kids, that they have this way of understanding the culture in the world and they're growing in it. But there's also kind of this way of looking at the world and realizing that kids kind of see and interact with the world sometimes based on their proclivities, right? I like logic things, so I kind of lean into looking at the world through a logic lens. I enjoy, being outside and in nature. And so I kind of see the world from that sense of what can kind of happen here in the world, what can naturally kind of grow here, and how can I be creative in it? When we think of this kind of challenge, you called it a dysphoria. How do we kind of address this, knowing that in some of our families, we've got kids that are going to have different ways of seeing the world? Is there a 8 great smarts kind of approach to looking at this problem through that lens? How should we talk to somebody that's nature smart about this challenge of this dysphoria that's happening here? What would you kind of say to that?
It makes me think of something we talk about that we've got to keep talking about, and that is, who are we allowing our children to follow? And what are we allowing them to watch on their screens? And that's where they're getting so much of their thoughts about what is pretty and beautiful and right and even prestigious. Like if they think prestige is money or power or only physical beauty, that concerns me. For the believer, prestige is Christ-likeness. If you're raising your kids up to be like Jesus, prestige is a Billy Graham, if you will, and a modern day Billy Graham, if they exist. And there certainly are some like that. Pointing out, the strength of the body of believers and having your pastor over for dinner and his wife and the children's pastor and talk about the call upon your life and why you've invested so much. So the first thing I think of is, who are we allowing them to follow and become like? How do they define prestige? The kind of influence that they hope that they can maybe have. What are we modeling? And the smarts, interesting question. Picture smart people judge everything by their eyes. So they judge a book by its cover, if you will. Picture smart people, if they're not mature, will have a tendency to judge people by their appearance. And that would include the quality of their coat. They might assume that somebody with a dirty coat that doesn't fit well is poor, and that might not be true at all. They might think that somebody who's not as pretty as somebody else could never be a TV newscaster, and that may or may not be true. So I think picture smart people, you need to make sure that they're using more than their eyes, they're using their heart to invest in the world. I think logic smart people, like you mentioned, would be thinking questions and answers all of the time. Nature smart, they think with patterns. Nature smart, what I think is interesting, what if we taught them that, snakes shed their skin and get a new skin, and then that lets them grow more. Eagles get new feathers and a new beak, and that allows them to live many, many, many more additional years. Well, we're not created like that. So we have to be really careful of the body we have, because it's the body we get. We're not going to get a second skin, if you will. Maybe that would be a fun way to talk about it.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I like that a lot. I want to kind of close by just asking, what encouragement would you have and kind of say to parents when this is just a reality? Sometimes these things come into our homes and we never intended. Our kids don't have devices, but the mood of the culture kind of ends up permeating. What would you say to kind of encourage parents that might have this and they didn't ask for it?
Yes. Welcome to the world, right? I like to say it's in the air we breathe. There's some pretty good data, I think, that still is suggesting that even if the children in your home don't have technology or use it far less than others, it still will affect them because it's where they go. You can't hardly go to a restaurant today that doesn't either have TVs on the wall or a device on the table that you pay through that also has games to play, which I don't like using those. I want to pay the server if he or she wants a tip. That's a whole nother speech. But the encouragement that I would give a lot of parents who are listening is to say no to their children. We're not having a birthday party at Sephora for you. We're going to go to, and fill in the blank. We're staying home, or we'll go to a park or the zoo. And you say to your kids, that's ridiculous. It's okay for your cousin. We're not raising your cousin. We know that there are kids in your school class that, that's what they're talking about. And we're sad that they've chosen to invest so much of their energy in something that we've decided is superficial. I think you have a right to your values and communicating them to your kids. And we're foolish if we don't.
As Dr. Kathy was talking, I was reminded of a passage out of Isaiah 46, and I'm going to begin reading at verse 3. Listen to me, you descendants of Jacob, all the remnant of the people of Israel, you whom I have upheld since your birth and carried you since you were born. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he, and I am he who will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will sustain you, and I will rescue you. Sometimes when I think about how I should handle different movements in culture, it's kind of interesting to flip into the book of Isaiah. There just seems to be so many times where God kind of reminds Israel, sometimes in nice ways, but also sometimes in really hard ways, hard to hear ways, that he is their God. And actually, he's going to be the one that's only going to be able to sustain them, the only one who is actually capable of supporting and helping them. There's so many different kind of segments and passages, but I picked this one today because it talks about what it looks like to grow old and that God will be there. He's sustaining us. I think sometimes when kids experience things, and I think it's true for adults too, especially things that we've never encountered before, things that make it easier, or I would even say things that give us the courage to face things that we've never faced before, it's really community. It's the way that God's kind of designed it. And I think when we look around the world and we kind of consider the different things that we're facing, it's nice to turn to different times in Scripture where different people experience different challenging things. David had Jonathan walk with him through really hard times in many ways. And one of the obvious ones for me is the disciples who meet together in the upper room and are encouraged to go and face something really challenging. For many of them, persecution until death. And they do it and they start together. And so I think if your kid's nervous, or even if they're not nervous, maybe we could kind of have this conversation before it happens. To have this conversation that growing old is great. It's kind of fun. It's okay. And when we encounter the things that we're not really sure about, and as we age and it gets harder, the things that we can do are being together. And that might start with us going and visiting our grandparents or our great-grandparents and letting them know that we're here with them. And it's important to do that. I think teaching kids and kind of doing those active things with them can be a bright light that shines and cuts through some dark times and uncertainty that they're going to experience. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast, and this is our daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.